Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dora Muhammad, Congregation Engagement Director at Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, and I also spearhead our racial equity program here. And so this is our segue into affordable housing. We're talking about 3 budget amendments today that will be before the General Assembly in this current session. And joining me today right now are 2, hopefully 3, but 3 are sort of the brain trust behind shaping these budget amendments. Um, and so the person that's missing is the program that we were part of shaping. This is Virginia Poverty Law Center. So you will see me go off camera when I try to give them a call. But again, we are in session. So they did let me know they might have been in committee. But with me today, thank you, is Brian Koziel, Executive Director for Virginia Housing Alliance, and Mariko Lewis, Housing Analyst, Research. I'm saying Housing Research Analyst. Got it right. And New Virginia Majority. And so again, when we did our, just so some context, as the Health Equity Program Manager, I've constantly been tracking affordable housing because it is a social determinant of health. And so, and it definitely became an issue during the pandemic because of the eviction crisis. But then part of that also, additionally with that, is part of our racial equity work. And so it really just married the two for me. And we began discussions with the Virginia Poverty Law Center last fall. And when we did our member survey last year, affordable housing was one of the top 3 issues that our members were concerned about. And so we definitely wanted to prioritize it in 2022. And so we're very happy to support the work that our colleagues are doing in this space. And so I will let them get into the details of their budget amendments. The good thing is budget amendments, the budget bill is taken up last. So we have time to really delve into and understand how we can support what they're doing, the long-term vision for what they're doing. And if you all would kind of just also just give some background on how you all developed the program, why it became sort of something that was prioritized for you all in 2022. So we'll begin with Mariko. I will spotlight you. And thank you again for joining us, everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mariko. I'm the Housing Policy Analyst at New Virginia Majority. And let me pull up my slides. Okay, hopefully this is working. Oop, 1 second. I have too many screens up. My apologies.
Don't feel bad. We were laughing all day today. Like literally every 15 minutes, my computer's telling me, you're low on memory space. You're low on memory space.
All right. Do you all see this presentation?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So today I'll be presenting on the Virginia Housing Stability Fund. This is a budget amendment that is being entered on the House side by Delegate Coiner and on the Senate side by Senator McClellan. And this budget amendment will essentially create the Virginia Housing Stability Fund, which will provide targeted long-term rental assistance to stabilize low-income Virginians, reduce evictions, and create a pathway out of poverty. And so there have been several groups that have been working on this amendment for a few months now, and that includes New Virginia Majority, Virginia Housing Alliance, the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington, the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and the Virginia Apartment Management Association. And so I think it's a really great sign that this program has bipartisan support, as well as the support of tenants organizations and apartment organizations as well. So first, I'll just get into what the budget amendment will do. It will establish the Virginia Housing Stability Fund, which is going to provide long-term rental assistance, also known as housing vouchers, to low, very low, and extremely low income renters to ensure that they're able to afford housing that costs them only 30% of their income or less. And so you might be wondering what the difference is between low, very low, and extremely low income renters is. Extremely low income renters are renters who make 30% of the area median income or less. Very low renters are renters who make 30 to 50% of the area median income. And low income renters are folks who make 50 to 80% of the area median income. And so in the first year, this budget amendment will direct a stakeholder group, which will include the Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as tenant organizations, tenants, landlords, and other housing organizations, to develop recommendations for the program. And then in the second year, we have asked for $73 million to fund long-term rental assistance that will help an estimated 4,500 households and give these households rental vouchers. So now we're getting into the need of this program and why we think this program is extremely important. First, the Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program is a great program, and it's proven to prevent eviction, lift folks out of poverty, and reduce racial disparities and housing instability. But one of the main issues with this federal program is that there's simply not enough funding to provide a voucher for everyone who needs one and is eligible for one. So this leads to only 1 in 5 voucher eligible Virginia households who are able to receive a federal housing voucher, which leads to an estimated 347,000 folks who are eligible for a voucher but unable to receive one in Virginia. And so this next part, Dora encouraged me to make this presentation a bit more interactive. And so this next part is for you all to put in the chat what you think the average wait time is to receive a federal voucher in Virginia in months. And so if you all want to put your guesses in the chat on how many months you think it takes the average person to receive a federal voucher in Virginia, I will monitor the chat. 15 months, 36 months, 12 months, 6 months, 60 months, 25 months. Okay, so we're getting a lot of answers. Some are very close. I think the closest one I saw was 36 months. Some people thought it was much less than that. And so the answer is 35 months, which means the average wait time to receive a federal voucher in Virginia is actually almost 3 years, which is an extremely long time. And that's not even including the people who actually have not received a voucher yet. And so 35 months is actually 8 months longer than the national average. And so it's fairly clear that there needs to be a lot more vouchers in the state of Virginia because folks need it and folks aren't able to get them. So now moving on to this graph down here, this is a chart that is showing the share of cost-burdened renter households in Virginia. And so if you look at all renters, nearly half of all renters spend over 30% of their income on rent. If you look at extremely low income renters, who are typically the ones who are voucher eligible, 85% of those renters spend over 30% of their income on rent, and 71% of those renters are severely cost burdened, meaning that they spend over 50% of their income on rent. And so as you can imagine, being extremely cost burdened and severely cost burdened really increases the risk of getting evicted and receiving an eviction notice. And so this is really what this voucher program is trying to combat, just ensuring that folks are not spending over 30% of their income on rent, because that increases the risk of eviction and leads to a lot of housing instability. It's also important to note too that cost burdened renters are typically disproportionately people of color as well. So now that we've kind of established the need for this program, I think it's important to talk about the support and infrastructure within Virginia, which is part of the reason why we thought it was a great idea to really push for this sort of program currently in Virginia, as opposed to waiting longer. And so JLARC, which is the research arm of the General Assembly, actually put out a report recently called the Affordable Housing in Virginia 2021 report. And in this report, they recommended that a state-funded housing voucher program was created, which is what this program is doing or would be doing. Similarly, HB 854, another housing study, was authorized by the General Assembly in 2020. This study has not come out yet, or at least it has not been publicly released yet, but this study will also recommend the creation of a state-funded housing voucher program. Next, we think the infrastructure in Virginia is currently here to create this type of program, in part because Virginia has built award-winning infrastructure to meet the state's housing needs during the pandemic, primarily through the rent relief program that was recently created and just got a lot of national press coverage on that. Additionally, we think the success of Virginia's rent relief program really stemmed largely from the desire of housing developers, providers, tenants, and tenant advocates to work together with the Department of Housing and Community Development to ensure that tenants were as protected as possible during the pandemic. And so because of this support from housing providers and tenants, tenant advocates, and really people working together, as well as the infrastructure that has been built, the award-winning infrastructure, we really think that now is the time to create this program and push for this budget amendment, in addition to the need just definitely being there. And so with that, I will open it up to questions if folks have any.
Someone asked, why is the time so long? 3 years is an extraordinary question.
I mean, part of the reason is probably just because there's such a large share of cost burden households in Virginia, and there's high income inequality in Virginia. And so there's probably a lot of people who are making less than 30% of the area median income who really need these vouchers, but yet because of federal funding constraints, they're not able to get them. Someone said, would undocumented people be eligible for this fund? That is something that I would definitely push for, and I would hope that that would be talked about in the stakeholder group that is going to be created with DHCD and tenant advocates and things like that. I think that's a really important thing to bring up. There's a statewide voucher program in Massachusetts, and that is actually the program that a lot of people say the federal program was based off of. And in that program, undocumented people are definitely eligible for those vouchers. And so hopefully they do the research and they understand that that is important, because I definitely think that undocumented people should be eligible for this fund. Another question is, will this be primarily for families? Would people with less than 30% AMI individuals be eligible? There's no restrictions on whether it's available for families versus individuals. And based off of other statewide programs, as well as the federal program, it's typical that people who are making less than 30% of the AMI are typically the folks that the vouchers go to primarily. And so it is very likely that a lot of the vouchers, if not most or all of the vouchers, would go towards extremely low income people. Are there regional differences in need? How does the state allocate funds? So I'm actually not sure if there's regional differences in need. I know there's certain issues that various regions go through. For example, in Northern Virginia, Rents are really increasing drastically, in part because of DC being right there, and in part because of the Amazon headquarters coming into that area and really making rents increase and making folks more cost burdened than they were previously. And I know that there's also a voucher program in Arlington, I believe. And so I think there are some regional differences in need. How does the state allocate funds? I don't really understand that question. If you could elaborate that a little bit, I could try to answer that. What percentage of people in Virginia who qualify for housing vouchers get them? So that would be around 20%, because 1 in 5 people who qualify actually receive one because of the funding constraints. These are all great questions. Are there any more about the budget amendment? I think I might see one.
There's one in the Q&A says, it concerns me that owners of substandard housing will benefit from the voucher program more than the tenants.
Yeah, I definitely understand that concern. It's of my opinion that tenants will really benefit from this program. And if someone is in substandard housing, then that is definitely not okay. I will say as well, like for the federal housing voucher program, landlords and tenants have to go through tenant screenings, or not tenant screenings, sorry, housing screenings, just to ensure that they are in not substandard housing conditions and they're in healthy housing units. And so we're not sure if that's going to be part of the statewide voucher program or the state funded voucher program. We really want to get this passed. And if it does, I do believe it will help tenants a lot, just because you saw those slides where a lot of extremely low income renters are paying over half of their income on rent, which is really increasing the likelihood that folks could get evicted and things like that. So I do believe that this program really will benefit tenants a lot. So someone said, when is it appropriate to discuss with our legislators the need to support this amendment? Dora, did you have an answer for this? Because I believe you said that you would be talking about this either at the end or beginning of the presentation.
Yeah, I was going to do it at the end, but I can answer it now. So the budget bill is the last bill to be taken up, so it's near time of crossover. We definitely can start talking to them now, because truly it's just the money committees that really just will determine whether or not it's included in the budget. So for us, as at the center, our advocacy will be specifically for the money committees when we send out an action alert. It will be to all the members in Senate appropriations and House appropriations. And then it's twofold. So we definitely want it to be included in each versions of the budget that each chamber does. Again, they don't pick up the budget bill until all the other bills are done. It's towards the very end before crossover. So we definitely have at least a couple of more weeks on that. Then once it's in the budget or not, of course, the Senate and House generally has two different versions of their budget. They then have conferees that are appointed to kind of work out the negotiations and the compromises. We'll do a second push then to really get people to commit. Whoever from the House or Senate appropriations committees were assigned to the budget conference, we then lobby those folks to make a commitment to keep whatever is in the budget around these amendments, to keep it in there and not let it fall on the floor in negotiation. Those are the two top areas. And Brian can expand if there's others that I may miss, that I may be more behind the scenes, but that's sort of the angle we took last year with our prenatal care budget. Any other questions? No. Thank you, Mariko. I'm going to bring Brian on now. Brian, if you want to come back on screen. And we do have Attorney Laura Dobbs with us from the Virginia Poverty Law Center. Brian, oh, there he is. Okay, now I can spotlight you. Excellent.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Koziel. I am the Executive Director of the Virginia Housing Alliance, and our mission is to increase access to affordable housing and end homelessness across the state. And we do this through a variety of ways, but most notably and most relevant is work at the General Assembly. Historically, we have been heavily involved in budget priorities and take up legislative issues as they arise. So the biggest item for us this year, it's not actually a budget amendment. It is included in the governor's outgoing budget, and that is an increase in the Virginia Housing Trust Fund, which was created by the state legislature in 2013, and has been funded at some level since 2014. I think from 2014 through 2020, total awards in aggregate are about 124 million. Through which we have been able to leverage that and build over 6,000 units of affordable housing across the state. The governor's outgoing budget included funding totaling $300 million over the biennium. So next year, if we are able to keep that budget request, it would be $125 million, which is what we have been able to get in aggregate over the life of the program, all in 1 year. And then the following year would be another bump up to $175 million. So really a historic opportunity to increase funding for the Housing Trust Fund, and by statute, all of that funding must go to create or rehabilitate housing that is affordable for households making 80% of the area median income or less. And the overwhelming majority of those resources go to the 40 to 50% area median income. The way that those funds are awarded, the first priority is for permanent supportive housing. So as identified by the state. So currently, individuals that have serious mental illness, chronically homeless, developmental disabilities, and then a new program for parenting and pregnant women with a history of substance abuse disorder. And so building, those resources go to help build permanent supportive housing, and then just kind of more broadly, somewhat deeply affordable housing. And then part of that process is, as we have worked to increase the dollar amount in the trust fund, we're also working with the Department of Housing and Community Development that it serves as the administrator of those resources, to constantly revise the guidelines and application process to ensure that we are able to meet the needs of low-income Virginians across the state. In kind of what we kind of see on the ground is that we are able to when you have, and it's been, funded at $10 million per year for so many years that we've had to treat it one way, but hopefully if we're able to get this, keep this budget or this amount in the budget, we're able to open it up and do a lot more with it. And that means more units, deeper affordability, more permanent supportive housing. And then on related to permanent supportive housing, we're also supporting a budget increase through DBHDS for an additional $34 million in funding for permanent supportive housing. And that goes specifically for vouchers or rental assistance for individuals with serious mental illness, developmental disabilities, chronically homeless, and then the state rental assistance program and the pregnant and parenting women program. So I see a question: will affordable housing funds be available to create special supportive clusters for at-risk or disabled folks with some staff support? Yeah, so ideally, and that's a really good question. The trust fund is actually really kind of heavily coordinated across several state agencies: DHCD, Virginia Housing, DBHDS, and DMAS. And so, currently all of the kind of affordable housing funding that gets prioritized for PSH. And what we're finding is that we need more funding for those supportive services and kind of that wraparound support. And so we are exploring ways to increase funding for that as well, so that our all of the coordination can be effective, right? And so that we're not only building the units, but we're also kind of providing those supportive services and wraparound services that are so critical to success. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Those are that and the Virginia Housing Stability Fund. And I'm not going to bore you with the complexities of another priority, but we are working on expanding the Housing Opportunity Tax Credit Program, which is just another financial mechanism to create additional affordable housing that's based upon the federal low-income housing tax credit program, which has been very successful across the country and in Virginia since 1986. We've been able to leverage that tax credit to build over 100,000 units of long-term, environmentally friendly, sustainable, affordable housing. So looking to kind of catalyze that federal investment with a state credit to do even more. Great question. Really early to tell. I think that we have always approached housing as a nonpartisan issue. We've got affordable housing friends and champions on both sides of the aisle. Totally not sure about the administration at this point. I will say that Governor-elect Youngkin came, it was about 3 weeks ago, to a Habitat for Humanity build site in Richmond, and made his announcement for the Secretary of Commerce and Trade there, which the Department of Housing and Community Development is under that secretary. So I think that is a really good signal that housing is an important issue to the administration, and we'll do everything we can to elevate it.
Oh, someone asked if you can read the question. So that question he just asked was, what support can he expect in the new administration in the 2022 GA? Remind us who was appointed to that secretariat.
That's a good question. Her name is Karen Merrick, I believe. Yep. Karen Merrick is the new Secretary of Commerce and Trade.
I have a question for you, Brian. So there was an event I was at, one of the panelists, and one of the senators was saying how typically Virginia touts, how much they've saved or have budget surplus. And the senator was sharing how that's because there's so much essential programs that's been so underfunded for so many years. And so I know that we were happy to see the level of funding for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund that Northam did on his outgoing budget. What kind of sort of impact, if you can give us sort of the landscape of how it's been funded ever since it was established, sort of what journey of levels of funding, and where does that sort of impact our contemporary housing needs because of the level of funding?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The funding has not remained static. It's kicked around at about 10 million or like 7 million a year, give or take, for the majority of the time. And then we were able to last budget cycle get the total award up to $127 million in total over the biennium. So it is currently funded at 55 million. So we are taking it up to, hopefully 125 million next year, and then the year after that 175 million. And kind of the reasoning behind that is it goes back to being underfunded, right? Is that we need to ensure that there's the infrastructure to support those resources in place so that, worst case scenario, we never want to be in a position to go back to the legislature and say, hey, we couldn't expend all of the resources that you made available to us. And we are very results oriented and really want to be able to produce good results and track outcomes and success, and be able to report back to the legislature that, hey, demand is still far outweighing available resources, and we need more each year, and scale it up responsibly. And we do that very collaboratively, working with partners all across the state, as well as the General Assembly and the Department of Housing, Community Development, and Virginia Housing.
Well, I do thank you for your leadership in this. There's one last question, and I do know Jace Hatcher, our Economic Justice Program Manager, definitely stays in tap and in sync with what you all are doing. And so it's lovely to be able to really put this as one of our priorities this year, because your leadership is exceptional in this space. Thank you. Yeah. So the last question I'll give to Brian. Can you talk a bit more about the funding for supportive wraparound services? Would that hopefully be a part of the increase that you're looking for the funding for Virginia Housing Trust?
Yeah, so the Housing Trust Fund, by state code, no less than 80% can be used for the production of affordable homes across the Commonwealth, and no more than 20% can go to homeless reduction grants. So I apologize, I should have made that distinction at the beginning of my talk. So it's basically an 80-20 split. 80% goes to production, right? So it is really about addressing the supply side issue, And that's why we've been so supportive and involved in the Virginia Housing Stability Fund that Marika talked to you all about, because to meet the housing needs of low-income Virginians, we can't just, I believe the JLARC report said that it would cost Virginia $5 billion annually to meet the housing needs of low-income Virginians. And so until we get there, which I have every intention of getting us there one day, we have to kind of do what we can and address the supply side as well as the demand side to the best that we possibly can. And so I did see a question in the chat: will the increase in funding allow everyone in Virginia household to spend only 30% of their income on rent? And unfortunately, no. We're looking at an estimated $5 billion, and we are fighting to keep an investment of $300 million in the Housing Trust Fund, $73 million in the Virginia Housing Stability Fund, and keep going back to the legislature with good outcomes and results, and continuing to advocate for more. I mean, money doesn't buy everything, but it does certainly buy a lot of housing. So we've got to keep at it.
Thank you so much, Brian. And last, Laura from the Virginia Poverty Law Center. Thank you.
Hi, my name is, thank you so much. Laura Dobbs. I'm a housing attorney with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. Thank you so much for having me. I apologize, I'm late. I had just technical difficulty after difficulty. At the Poverty Law Center, we work to break down systemic barriers that keep people in poverty, and we do that through education, through litigation, and through advocacy. And I particularly work on housing. A lot of my work previously has been focused on tenants' rights and making sure that tenants have a clean, healthy, safe place to live that is affordable, and helping them enforce those rights. But in that, to make sure that people have access to housing, a huge bedrock that is missing for a lot of our families in Virginia is access to homeownership. So we've been working towards having funding for what we're calling the Restorative Homeownership Pilot Program, our Home for short. It would be a pilot program based in the Richmond metro area. So not just the city of Richmond, but all of the counties in the surrounding Richmond area. That also includes Petersburg, Hopewell, and other counties around there. And it's intended to address the continuing harm that Virginia's and their ability to access and build wealth through homeownership as a result of past discriminatory government policies, including redlining, race-restricted deeds, and urban renewal projects that destroyed certain neighborhoods, and how those have led to ongoing disparate impact in homeownership in the Commonwealth. The wealth gap continues to grow between Black and white households, and a lot of that flows from discrepancy in homeownership rates, as home equity and retirement accounts comprise roughly 63% of most people's household net worth in the US. But in 2019, the median wealth of Black households was only $24,000, as opposed to white households, which was roughly $189,000. And we've also seen the homeownership discrepancy between Black and white families grow. The subprime mortgage crisis is an example of how even current practices continue to harm Black families in being able to build wealth in their homes. And so this is a program to seek to address those harms and practices and that disinvestment from Black neighborhoods by giving funding for very robust down payment assistance. Assistance would range from 6% to 50% of the sales price of the home, and it would be in the form of a forgivable second mortgage. Those who are families or who are in the lowest income brackets would receive significantly more down payment assistance than those with higher incomes, such that people who are in the 30% area median income range, so our families who are earning the least of, would receive approximately 80%, I apologize, would have much higher down payment assistance to make it possible to access homeownership. There's a lot of really great down payment assistance programs out there that are a great model, but we just need more infusion and investment in providing funds for families to be able to afford a home and making monthly payments that families can keep on top of. And then as the family continues to make successful payments on their first mortgage, that second mortgage gets forgiven every year, so that as long as they're making those payments, they're building equity in the home. We know that equity is so important for families to build wealth. It can be a catalyst for starting a business. It can help if a family gets hit with an unexpected medical bill, and having that bedrock is such important in creating housing stability here in Virginia. The Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development would, through this program, take feedback from Virginia Housing and establish guidelines for this program, working with stakeholders involving people from the mortgage industry, real estate, legal aid, housing counselors, and low-income Virginians themselves, who should have a say in how this program is designed, as well as community land trusts to look at alternative homeownership models and develop some guidelines. There's some minimum things that we think should be included in that program. One is to ensure that the eligibility, income eligibility requirements serve those with the lowest incomes possible, while guaranteeing that program participants won't have to spend more than 25% of their income on housing. Additionally, it's aimed at redressing historical policies that have discriminated against people of color. And so it would prioritize Virginians whose ancestors' homes were taken by the government through eminent domain for highway construction and other urban renewal projects without just compensation. It would also help those who have lost or whose ancestors lost farmland they own because of discrimination in government and private lending practices for farmland, or those who were ancestors who were denied low interest mortgages for purchase of a home in the area that was designated hazardous by the Home Loan Corporation. That's referring to redlining, as well as those who had subprime mortgages and lost their homes through foreclosure, which we know a lot of that was targeted predominantly toward Black families offering up those subprime mortgages, as well as those who presently own a home in a neighborhood that has been disinvested due to discriminatory policies and practice and can't afford the cost of making those repairs. That's another component of this, is to help existing homeowners make those necessary deferred maintenance repairs so they don't lose their home. And then additionally, a requirement that participants be first-time home buyers as defined by HUD. So it would help people who have lost their home during the subprime mortgage crisis. At this point, there's not enough time, they'd be considered first-time home buyers. And so we see this pilot as important, proof of concept, making sure it works, able to show success, but also focusing in an area that we know it's really easy to trace that history and show how the discriminatory practices have impacted families. The funding would also include a staff position to help those families do the research. We understand there's various barriers that people have to trying to find the documentation that show that they qualify for the program. So we believe it's important to invest in staffing to help those families. They might have a story in their family about like, oh, I know grandma lost her home during this time, but I don't have the deed or access to anymore. So the staff person would help them actually do that research and be able to show. So we hope that through this program that we'll see increased homeownership among historically disenfranchised communities, hopefully see increased use in community land trusts, as well as increased access to homeownership for Virginians whose incomes are at or below median income, and as well as increased investment in previously redlined neighborhoods that we know continue to suffer and we know continue to have really high rates of eviction. And now to the cost. I know there's a question. So is this a pot of money provided by state budget? No, we are going to be advocating for a budget amendment and ask them to commit this funding for this program. So it would be about 10.9 million for each of the next 2 biennial budgets. So that's an annual cost about $5.45 million. And a breakdown of what that would look like, it would be 17.8 million in down payment assistance for approximately 200 households. And there would be 2 million in grants for deferred maintenance for roughly 50 eligible households. And then 2 million or 10% of the total value of this for administration of the program. I know there's a question about how many are likely to be eligible and how will the project administrator select the recipients. So for the first question, how many are eligible? We know, at least looking at one discrete historical example of the Randolph neighborhood that was partly demolished to build highway construction, that there's about 300 families that were displaced. And that is one tiny example in the city of Richmond. So we know there are many more eligible households than are going to be able to participate in the program. So we understand 200 is a small number considering the dollar, but if you're going, the government has a responsibility to rectify past discrimination, and to do that requires a deep investment. And we think that demonstrating that through this pilot program, that hopefully they can invest even more money and open it up to other parts of the state so that they're able to serve more households. And we also see this as fitting into a larger context of some of the other projects that were talked about earlier on this call, and other efforts to open up homeownership opportunities, building of more affordable housing, opening up more on housing choice vouchers. So it really is just one piece of the puzzle. And there's a question, is this a reasonable expectation of support for the General Assembly? It's hard to know on the House side. We do have a budget amendment in the Senate and in the House, but we do have a lot of really strong supporters in the Senate. And so we're hoping that they will really champion this issue, be able to talk about that past discrimination and the obligation that we have to rectify that, and show that to really make sure that people have stable homeownership opportunities does require a deep investment. It's not a small ask, and we recognize that, but we also think to rectify these practices, it needs deep investment. And there was a question, explain how it's a pilot and what happens after 2 years. So the reason why we're asking for money through 2 cycles is we think that in order to show success, it will take time. It'll probably take a year to really get the guidelines rolled out, the program set up, and that you're probably not going to see any families buying homes until the second year. And so probably after 2 years before you get data back showing families making payments, which is why we're looking at 2 budget cycles that we're going to be going back asking money for, because to really show how effective a program is, it's not just a matter of how many families are able to buy homes and get in the program, but how successful are those families at continuing to make those payments, and are they in the home, 5, 8, 10 years later after they've participated. And we recognize that takes time. And then after those 2 budget cycles, it helps lower the cost and a better window for that data collection. And we also recognize that some families might need a little bit more time to become home ready. They might need help preparing their credit score so they can qualify for that first mortgage. So that's why we think this needs some time and air to breathe to get good data back and make the program better. Yeah, there's a comment, often the mortgage payment is actually lower than the rent. That can be true. And part of the commitment to providing really robust down payment assistance is to make sure that those payments are kept low and that they're not having to get mortgage insurance on top of that, that it would also help pay for those closing costs that can make it really unattainable for some families. But sometimes if people can't keep their mortgage payment low, then they can't afford to do some of that maintenance. You know, if you have a leaky faucet and you don't have the extra $50 to call on the plumber to fix it, and suddenly that leaky faucet turns into mold and that balloon's out of control, that can be the sort of situation that can lead a family into a foreclosure because suddenly have these massive repairs they can't afford, or they're forking out that money and can't make those mortgage payments. So keeping those mortgage payments as low as possible, we think is the key to helping families be successful in this type of program. And I'm happy to answer any questions that were not posted in the chat.
Great job. I'm sure the questions will keep coming. Okay, I'm going to bring all our panelists back in. And just want to thank you all. I know Brian might have left. I don't know. Brian? Brian's like, I'm done for the day. Well, thank you all. Again, this is such an essential policy that we all will keep our tabs on for this session. I thank you all for your leadership in really crafting these programs that we can support and understand. Likely there will be some more questions once Budget Sunday hits, and we sort of see where things stand. And we were talking about sort of having a crossover kind of update on different things. And so definitely know the budget amendments will be a crux of sort of action that people can take. And so look for a follow-up from me on behalf of the center. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.